Hello there, everyone, and a very happy Thursday. As you can see, I do have a very special guest with me today, but I will go through the housekeeping first. So, welcome, everyone. We do hope that you're having a crafty day so far. The amazing Han is behind the badge today, and she'll be popping in all of the links for the products that the fabulous Carissa uses today. If you do share this live stream, you are in with a chance of winning a $15 gift certificate to the Altenew store. Hey, Carissa, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Lydia?
I'm good. We were just talking before, and I put the heating on because I was cold, and now I am freezing. I mean, I'm boiling, and there was a lot of chat in the comments saying that a lot of people were cold, and I was feeling that half an hour ago. Not so much.
I was cold today too, so I put on my heat as well. But I can change it from my phone, which is right here, so we're all good.
See, I wish I was that tech savvy. I am not. My husband has it on his phone, so I have to text him to let him know to turn it down.
You can still do that. We will let you text your husband if you get too warm and tell him turn down the heat.
Yeah, but hopefully it'll kick off in a bit because it is on a schedule as well. So hello, everyone that is popping in. It's lovely to see everyone's faces, a lot of new ones, and we also have some regular people. So we also have the fabulous Carissa's channel streaming on this one as well, so we can see all the comments from them as well.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah, so it's really cool. So if you do have questions, please let us know. I will gently nudge Carissa and interrupt her. Not try and be nice, but if you have questions, we want to know these. We want to know the answers. So I will do the nudging for you. Because the project that Carissa is going to be sharing today is quite, I'm going to say, involved. We decided that the fabulous Carissa will be using the whole screen. So I will not be getting in her way today. So Carissa, do you want to say anything about your project today?
Yeah, so I went we were like, let's use watercolor. And I was like, let's do no line. Why not do it live, right? You know what? Sometimes the things I pick to do live, I'm like, why did I do that? But here's what I want to tell everybody from in the chat, because I think when you hear no line watercolor, it's like, whoa. It doesn't have to be. And I do not consider myself a watercolor expert. So I feel like if I can do this, you can do this. And I'm going to give you just a few basic tips. Now, there's some people out there that are going to be like way better at this than me, but I just makes progress. And I think that if you try this and give this a try, you might be pleasantly surprised at the results that you can achieve. So we have a lot that we're going to talk about, from mixing colors to creating dark and light spots in your painting, I guess. So we're going to talk about it all. If you have questions along the way, I'll be happy to answer what I know, but it's going to be from the amateur point of view, which I think maybe that will help people feel a little more comfortable with it, because I am not someone that can just sit down with some paints and just paint a masterpiece. I need the help of a stamp, which we're going to use today. But my whole thing is, when you break things down into steps, and you take it step by step, you can do this. And so maybe your first try is not going to be the most amazing, but I think that the more that you do it, you're going to see progress in yourself. And that always feels so good. And it's good to challenge ourselves from time to time with things that, are just a little out of our comfort zone.
I also think that breaking it down into little bits helps. So you're going to be showing how you do that. But when you look at a whole stamp and you're like, oh, that's going to be challenging to color. But once you take it petal by petal, it just kind of just blooms in front of your eyes.
It does. And that's exactly what we're going to do today, petal by petal.
Okay, right then, everyone. Carissa, do you want to pop yourself down?
Sure.
And then we can get going. As you can see the amazing project that she is going to be creating today. And if you do have these products at home, you're going to be able to kind of grab your supplies and maybe give this a go with her, or maybe on the replay as well. So I am going to get rid of myself and then we're just going to be able to see the fabulous kind of project come to life.
Yeah, and Lydia and I are going to chat along through this, and she's going to help me out with questions. Someone over there, Carrie, is already saying she sees Garden Whispers. Yes, I am going to be using that. So that's a Craft Your Life Garden Whispers stamp set. I also have used the die set in this project, but this is what we're aiming for today. And just some beautiful, I don't know if you can see the shimmer. I'm hoping you can, but I've actually used some of the shimmer relief paste to add some kind of shine to this final watercolor project.
Yeah.
So I'll start out by saying that I'm using the gorgeous new Petal palette, and you can see I think a palette is way prettier when it's got this smear of old paints. It's all dried on there. Everything I'm starting with today is dry from the other day when I was creating, and I have my watercolor tubes in my palette kind of just squeezed out. I have a couple extra wells here that I haven't used. So, but I have a nice kind of rainbow, and I have mixed these colors to create some custom colors today. So we'll get into that in just a moment, but I'm also using these gorgeous fine watercolor brushes. These have I have several more that I haven't pulled out, but today I'm using the 6 and the 1 sizes to get some detail in there. But we're going to start out with stamping first. And we all know about stamping, right? I mean, that's the easy part in this whole thing, but I'm going to give you some tips that will hopefully make this work better for you. So I have my Stampwheel 2.0. I have the large Garden Whispers stamp here, and I have some cold press watercolor paper from Altenew already cut out into a square. 6x6 worked well for this. I just needed some extra room to make sure that everything's on there. You could probably cut this down smaller, but you know, we're going to make it easy on ourselves. So I have that mounted in the corner, and I have my stamp ready to go on my flip plate. For this, I'm going to be using the Permanent Miss Gray Pigment ink. And this is a great ink that's going to give us a line that we can follow, but it's going to kind of disappear as we do our watercolor. So that makes it kind of nice. So I'm just going to start out by stamping. I'm going to ink up and then stamp onto, I'm actually stamping onto the textured side of the watercolor cardstock because I'm not looking for like these defined lines in my stamp in the end project. So I can get away with going to the more textured side and using that today and giving me that like luxurious watercolor look, you know?
So do you have like a favorite watercolor paper, like cold press or hot press? Do you like kind of go for one over the other?
Well, because I'm an amateur, I know like a little bit of the difference between hot and cold. But I would say whatever I have close to me at that point, that will make it work.
I think that's most of us, right? Whatever's there, if it's watercolor paper, it's watercolor paper.
Yes, and I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know more about this than I do, but cold press, you're going to end up with a little more texture in the watercolor paper, and then the hot press is a little bit smoother. So if you're looking for like nice, smooth stamped lines, maybe you want to lean towards hot press. If you like the texture of watercolor cardstock or watercolor paper and you want a little more of that texture, then maybe you want to go with a cold press.
Yeah.
So, and this is kind of hard to see. I'm actually stamping this a few times and getting that line built up because I want you all to be able to see it out there as well. And you're going to find that as I paint, even though this is maybe a little on the darker side, that it's going to disappear. So don't worry about if you need to stamp it a few times to really make that image something that you can, see to paint. You got to be able to see it to paint it. We're not trying to like invisible watercolor here,
Also, if you do have those like lines coming through slightly, it's just going to add more detail, right?
Right. And more shading and shadow and that sort of thing. So let me pull this up so you can see it a little bit better. So I have that image that I can follow. I can see here. It looks a little blown out when I put it down, but we're going to move on with this because this is good enough for me. Just know that when you're working on this in real life, or IRL, as we say, you're going to be able to see your lines well enough to kind of fill them in, add your shadows and your shading and that sort of thing. I have some water here. I have like a dry cloth. You could use a paper towel, whatever you want. But I'm going to quickly show you how I mix these colors because I do have some custom colors on my palette. You can see them all dried up here, a yellow, a green, and a kind of magenta-y color. So in order to mix the magenta, actually, it's maybe more of a fuchsia. I don't know. I'm not super color expert here, but I've grabbed the quinacridone magenta here, which is first over here on my palette. And I've mixed some of that in here. So I'm just picking it up with a damp brush and then like swirling it onto my beautiful palette here. I love this palette because it has this gold edge. And if you know me, I love all things gold.
It's so just so pretty.
It is so pretty. It is so pretty. And when you're working with pretty things, it just makes your heart happy. I believe that 100%. So I've grabbed quite a bit of that magenta, and now I'm going to the quinacridone violet, and I'm going to pull some of that in. And interestingly enough, I used more violet in this whole palette, more than you would think, because that violet is a great color to kind of tone some of the other colors. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a few minutes. So I'm just mixing that up. I have this water here. I'll probably replace it in just a moment. But first, I'm going to show you how to mix the green. So I've taken, this is phthalo green here. And you can see when I put this on my palette, this is like an in-your-face kind of green. You see that? Mm-hmm. But I wanted something a little more toned, and that's where that violet comes in. So complementary colors, you can use like a little bit of red if you wanted to kind of make this a little more on that brown green side, or you can bring in a little bit of that violet, and you can see I have a much more toned green than that bright kind of in your face. So
it's so cool how color wheels work, right?
Isn't it? Isn't it? And like that violet is the same color that I use to mix with this deep yellow, this permanent yellow deep. I got to get the right names in here. So when I bring this in, it's like not very mustardy. I don't know if you can, I'm mixing it in the middle of the old color, so it's kind of hard to see, but it also has a little bit of brown on it from the brown that I made. But it's a little bit brighter than I wanted it. I wanted it a little more toned. So again, I just grabbed a little bit of that violet, brought it in there, mix it all up. We went a little too far brown, but that's okay. We just bring in a little more of the yellow and we bring it back to that yellow color. So you kind of see how I made the brown there. Same thing, yellow and violet, which is that brown over here. So now we have some colors to work with here, and we're going to get moving on our project. So I'm going to switch out my water just because I made a hot mess of that. And we're going to get a little clean, clear water. And as Lydia mentioned in the opening, it's kind of a petal by petal thing. Now, realistically, I'm not going to be able to paint this entire thing, but we have planned for you. You're going to be able to take this step by step and do it. So I'm just going to pick this petal up here. Hold it up a little bit for you so you can see. So this petal up here, I'm going to start with that. And I'm just going to add a little bit of clean, clear water, not a ton. I don't want like a lake happening here, but I'm just going to kind of fill in the petal with some water. Then I'll get a little bit of water on my brush and grab this color here. And I'm just going to start adding some color. Now at this point, my goal is not to add detail or to add like a lot of definition. My goal is to get kind of a base layer of color laid down. So you're going to see me kind of spread out the color that I have. And that's kind of what I'm going for here at this stage, because we're going to paint these petals in layers is basically what we're going to do. So our first goal, go ahead.
Did you have, we had a question that says, what does quinacridone mean in the front of a color? It's just a pigment name. So a kind of pigment that gets used. So that's what the quinacridone is.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm glad Lydia's here. Because I have no idea. I just know that in watercolor, there's a lot of things that are called quinacridone. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. It was when I seen that and I was like, oh no, I've got to say that. And it took me forever to realize
Okay,
how to say it. But yeah.
here's the one. Tell me how you say the red, which is spelled Toluidine. Tell me that one. Because I was
The,
like, oh my gosh, I'm
the
not
red
using that
one?
red.
Can you
Yeah,
say which one
it's
was
like
it? Wait, one sec.
Toluidine. Tulidine?
Oh, one sec. Let me just get out. Because I'm one of them people that I can't say it unless I can see it. I would say Tolidine.
Tolidine. Okay, there you go. Because I was like, well, I'm not using the red, so I don't have to say it, but it's the second one in my palette here. I know how to say phthalo, so that's a common
See,
one.
I would say it different.
How would you say it?
I would say phthalo.
Okay, phthalo.
Yeah, but
I
you
think
know,
that's
it's
probably the difference of us living across the pond from each other,
yeah,
right?
probably.
Maybe I'm doing it wrong, and that's okay. That means you can
No.
do it wrong and still have you can still have decent results, right?
Oh, I
So one
know.
thing I want to point out is I'm doing the exact same thing to this petal over here, but I'm not painting two petals that are right next to each other. And that's because then they will just like bleh into each other, right? Because anywhere that the water is, the paint's going to go. So I'm kind of moving around and painting these petals that are kind of separated from each other to get this base color down. And you're going to see how this is going to build up. Now, I am doing what's called, and you don't need to know this to do it. This is where me watching a lot of YouTube videos has come in handy, but this is like a wet on wet technique, right? So the paint is wet and the paper is wet. So that's wet on wet. And you don't need to know it to do it. It's just like if you want to sound fancy during a live, there you go, you know? Now, something I do want to point out is you're going to see a few of these lines in there. Do you see how my color is almost catching the lines of that pigment ink? Don't worry about that at this point because we're going to go over and add detail at a later time. And we're going to kind of disguise those a little bit more or use those to kind of guide us on our shading. So for right now, we're just putting kind of these layers of color over, and then we're going to build it up later. So I'm going to do this little bud at the top here. And then what I might do is start working on a little bit of the green because I did do that in a different way, not on purpose, but just because I felt like it worked better in those smaller areas to do like a wet on dry. So, and you can kind of experiment. When I first painted this, I was like, I tried a wet on wet in the green and I was like, maybe that's not what I want to do. And I tried the wet on dry and that seemed to work better in those areas for me. So is there like one time when you would use one and one time when you would use another? Experiment with it. If you're not quite sure, you're not going to ruin it with one little leaf. So if you do a wet on wet with one leaf and it doesn't work out, you're not going to ruin your entire painting by experimenting just a little bit with the different, techniques.
No,
So
and
you can
always
see
you could let it dry and then go over it again if you wanted to.
for sure. So this is, I'm grabbing a little bit of the green now. I have a damp brush. And what I did for the green was I just kind of brought in these edges. And this is where these nice fine brushes come in. So I'm going onto dry cards or dry paper with the paint. And then I'm going to just kind of pull it out a little bit from there.
That looks like a fabric design now. You know, like sometimes they have the more ink around the edges as you
Yeah.
look at like a screen print. It looks really cool.
Yeah. And so I can kind of trace the edge of that. And eventually we're going to build up the edges anyway, and then like pull it out with a little bit of water. And then again, the goal of this is not to add all of my detail now, but just to add that base layer of color And then I'll show you what it looks like on a wet on wet for the green. It's going to kind of do the same thing, but I'm not going to have that hard outline like I get with the dry. Do you see that difference? Here,
Yeah,
let me.
it's so much softer, like
So
whimsical.
yeah, and I felt like doing the wet on dry. I'm going to pull you guys in just a little bit here. I felt like doing the wet on dry was just a little bit better for the greens. So again, I'll pick another leaf maybe down here. I'm going to kind of trace the outline of it, grab a little more water, and then just kind of pull it out.
I think this is less scary as well, right? So there are some people that may be a little bit nervous to try the no line watercolor, but I think by doing it this way, I think
Yeah,
it makes it less scary, I think. But it
for
also gives you
sure.
a great look.
Yeah. So then again, I just did a wet on dry, and I'm just kind of tracing it out. Now, eventually, we're going to want to create kind of hard lines at the edges anyway, because we need that contrast in order to tell us that this is not just a blob of something happening, but it's actually individual leaves. So without grabbing more paint, I'm just going to use the water that's in my brush to kind of pull that out. So I would love to know if anybody has questions. I'm going to just keep kind of painting away here. And again, I'm picking leaves that are not next to each other. And then by the time I'm done with a few of these leaves, then I can go back up to these petals because these will be dry enough and I can work on those petals. So you kind of have to work on this in stages. And this is kind of one of those, like, I'm in the mood to relax and kind of unwind a little bit. This maybe is one of those projects, not like I need to get it done in 5, 10, 15 minutes, right? I mean, this is definitely something that you're going to take your time with and you're going to build on.
And the way that we can just see that you're, you know, kind of tracing around the image, just adding a bit of water and a little bit of color here and there, it looks really quite relaxing to do. You know, there's not a lot of thought that you have to put in there. You're kind of just doing a little bit of tracing, right?
Right. Just tracing. And these nice, you could even go, if you're having a harder time, see, this is like a number 1 here, so that it's much smaller. So when you're going in for detail or you're having smaller areas that you need to go into, you would just pick a smaller brush, you know? So it doesn't have to be, the whole thing is, it doesn't have to be like complicated or rocket science. And you're going to see, you saw the card in the beginning. I don't consider myself an expert at all, but I was able to get good results just by breaking it down step by step and going through the process, right? That's really the big part of it, is just going through the process. So,
and I think with the no line watercolor, you feel like an artist at the end, right?
You really do. In fact, I showed my daughter, who is more of a paint artist. She does a lot of like oils and things like that. I showed her and I said, look what I did. And she said, you painted. And I said, well, actually, I didn't paint that. That's a stamp. And she was like, oh, that's really cool. So whereas she could come in here with a paintbrush and make this come to life without any outlines or anything on the canvas to begin with, or the paper to begin with, I'm one of those that I need a stamp to guide me along. And that's exactly just, you know, a great way to use these.
And that's good. That's okay. We're, you know, sometimes we just all need a little helping hand, and that's all that this is giving you. You are creating the image yourself, but you just needed a little nudge, right?
Yeah. And I think even when I pull in one that I've already worked on ahead of time to kind of speed this process along, I think you're going to see my results are not going to probably be exactly the same. Number 1, I mixed, you know, kind of new color into the color I had, you know, and things are just a little bit different, right? So you're going to get unique looks from this. The other tip that I would have for you is, if you're doing this and you're kind of like, I don't know a lot about light, here's the deal. I don't pay a lot of attention to that. I make light and dark spots in my petal, no matter what. There's a light spot and a dark spot. I don't get really super like complicated about where the light's coming from or anything like that. But I do make sure that there's, you know, light and dark, because that makes something more interesting. It makes it some more realistic. But if you're having a hard time figuring out maybe where you should put some lights and darks, you can look at the mocked up examples on like the stencil set or in the guide that comes with the stamp set. And that can kind of help guide you, like, where do I want this darker at? Where do I want this lighter at? And so you can kind of use images like that to kind of help you decide, okay, where do I want my light parts and where do I want my dark parts? So it doesn't, like I said, again, it doesn't have to be super complicated. It doesn't have to be like rocket science for you to get good results. But there's a few things that make it better, right? Dark spots, light spots. And that's really kind of the basics of it. So, all right. So you can see that this is a lot of the same over and over again, right? Adding the water, adding the color, or adding the color and then adding the water. Those are the two kind of main concepts of watercolor, right? Water and color. So here is an image that I have done ahead of time. Now here are the petals where I have done exactly what I've done here, where I've just added the wash of color and I've let it dry. Here are the petals where I've come back in and added the detail, and you can see where that detail really brings this image to life. And so that's why we're doing it in layers here. So let me show you on this one. I think we're dry enough up here. We might be dry enough up here for me to kind of show you this. But what I would do is I'm using a smaller brush, the one this time. I'm using less water in my brush, and a smaller brush is naturally going to hold less water. So when you're doing this, it's kind of good to, what I would say, downshift to a smaller brush, because you're going to hold less water automatically. And then I'm going to make some dark spots. So I'm coming in at the edge of the petal and bringing in that color. Now, if I want to kind of fade it out as we move towards the tip of the petal, then I would just bring in some more water on my brush and kind of pull that color out. Okay, so you can see I'm getting definition now between what we have here at the base of the petal and what's at the tip of the petal. And then I would go in and kind of start where those lines are that I can see, start adding some color there to kind of give my petal some definition. So just like little stroke marks. It doesn't, once again, I don't want you to think like I have to be good at like painting shapes to do this. It's really just kind of flicking your brush out. And the more that you practice it, the more that you're going to be comfortable with it, and the more that you're going to get results that you're loving. So
we have a comment from Michael saying that artists use a lot of shortcuts, like a cartoon, they call it, like the sketch, and a stamp is backed in like that sketch that they create before they paint. So,
oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And then I see a question from Sharon. Do you always use a permanent ink to stamp with? I've seen other creators use a water-based ink so it disappears. So you can do that, but you want to make sure that the color that you're going to use is going to blend in and work with the colors you're going to use on your image. Now, as you can see, I used a permanent color, and I'm not painting this portion here, but you can see my lines have disappeared as I've come in and I've added color. You can still see the lines here. And for me, that's a benefit, because I'm using that to help me determine where to put my dark, swooshes here or flicks. So I kind of like that I didn't lose all that line in there as I did my initial painting. So it's kind of up to you. If you want those lines to stick around to kind of help you out, then that, a light permanent ink like that might be your friend in the end. So it just kind of depends.
Also, you stamped this one a number of times so people could see it, right?
Correct.
So
yes.
At home, people would only need to stamp it once, and the lines wouldn't be as defined as they are in this one.
Correct. So like I said, I like to kind of pull my color and have it darker at the base. And I'm going to show you in just a moment how to really intensify this, because we'll go in with a little more color at the base, and we'll just keep kind of building that up to kind of bring it to life. Now, contrast is your friend. So if it looks strong at the beginning, don't get too worried, because we can always blend out, add another layer later. But you do want, like I said, darks and lights, right? You don't want it all to be flat one color, or it doesn't have any like life to it, essentially. So dark at the base, I'm using those lines to kind of help me. If you want it to kind of disappear a little bit more, add a little more color around the line. But it doesn't really bother me that it kind of grabs that, because you'll notice that that pigment ink grabs the watercolor a little bit, but that kind of helps define the petals too into that no line. And I get, like, it's not like a blob of purple. There's definitely individual petals. So I'm going to do kind of the same idea with my greens as well when I go back. So I'll add some darker color around the lines or around the edges where two things overlap, and then kind of blur it out with my water if it needs to be blurred out, intensify different areas, and that sort of thing. So really that's what it is. And see how harsh this is, but as it kind of dries into the paper, it's going to soak in, it's going to soften out a little bit. If it feels too harsh for you, take a damp brush. I placed it in my water. I'm a little zoomed in for you to see me placing it in my water, but I'm placing it in my water and kind of wiping off a lot of it. And then I can kind of soften this out with just water if I need to, So now let's do a little bit of the green here. So for the green, again, I have like little lines that you can see in the stamping, and I'm using those to my advantage. So I'm going to make sure that I intensify the color towards the base of the leaf, and then bring it up towards the detail lines that are in the stamp for me. And I can build up as much color as I want. Again, that contrast between that one and the leaf next to it is really what's going to help me define that there are individual leaves there and not just like this whole blob of green happening. This is not a Monet. It's got a little more definition than that. So this one is right up next to another leaf. And so I need to make sure that I'm defining this line here between this leaf and that next leaf, so that when I get all of my painting done, I have individual leaves. Now, here's a little tip I can tell you. If you are running into green on green on green on green, and you've added your paint at a more intense kind of level, and you're still not getting the definition, purple is your friend. I've grabbed just a little bit of this quinacridone violet, watering it down, and I can add it in here. When I soften it out, it's going to take on a more like brown shadow tone than the areas around it. So that can help me get a little definition in between those leaves too, by bringing in just a tiny bit of purple. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here on this example. So this line here that you see, that looks a little gray, shadowy, and not quite as green, that's that purple that quinacridone violet brought in there to create that shadow and that shading. So just a little differentiation between all of that green that's close together. So I'm going to start working on this painting now, because we're to the place where we're adding like our details, and I want to be able to kind of finish this off. So I'm going to work at kind of a little faster pace, doing the same thing, adding more color towards the base of the petal. And then if I need to soften it, I can bring in a little more water and do that.
So we have a question.
Sure.
Is there a big difference between tube paints versus pans?
Well, I am probably not the best person to answer that, but I bet Lydia knows the answer to that.
So I think it all depends on what you're going to use them for, and also how you like to travel with your paints as well, right? So
Oh yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
if you like to travel with your paints, I would say the pans are probably more travel friendly than
For
the
sure.
tubes. Um, but tubes, I find that you could probably get a little bit uh, mm, 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 more of a color variation with the tubes. Reason being is you put them on a palette and you kind of mix with them. Pans, I normally just kind of go in with the color that's there and maybe mix it if I need to.
Right.
Um, so if you are wanting to try tubes, I would just say get 1 or 2 colors. As you can see, Carissa's using like 4 colors, and
Yeah.
she has mixed them to create various different shades. So you can kind of stretch these out a little bit more, I would say, than the pans, because the pans, you normally just stick to what you've got because you've got a lot of choice there. But if you want to really amplify your color mixing skills, I would probably say go with the tubes.
Yeah, and I think the travel thing is just such a good thought on that. There are palettes that, like, you can squeeze tube paints into to make them more travel friendly, but I think, it's like, you know,
And
grabbing
it's always
pre-made.
preference as well. Like,
Yeah, I think so. I find that I will say that I find that look at how these petals have come to life since I've added that. I
they look
mean,
so pretty.
huge difference, right? I find that it's easier to kind of start the color in a tube, like it's more reactive to water maybe
Yes, definitely.
from
There's not as
from the
much
get-go.
binders.
Yeah, it's not like you have to like work and work and work the color to get it to start moving. It kind of just has
Yeah,
that ability to do it on its own.
because in pans there's binders in there to make it go, the way it is. But there isn't a lot of binders in the tubes that we
Yeah.
have. It's a lot of pigment. And it may last longer. I don't know. I've never got to the end of a pan or a tube, so I wouldn't be able to say anything. Sue's also asking, can you do this with the ink from ink pads? This
So
technique?
I actually have a video on my YouTube channel where I did this with a press plate and the fresh dye inks.
Ooh.
So yes, and it's blues, which I hardly ever use blue. I hardly ever use purples too. I feel like I'm coming out of my color shell recently. I'm doing things that I haven't normally done.
You go
So,
more into the cool colors then, with the blues and the purples?
well, I wouldn't say they're my first go-to. Everybody who knows me knows that I'm a pink girl. It is just what I am. I can't help it. It is who God made me. And so I'm okay with that. I do try to push myself to do things a little bit different because I know that not everybody loves pink, and that's okay. But recently I have, tried new things, the blues and the like we're doing purples here today, but this decidedly has like some of that magenta in it, so it kind of makes it a little less like royal purple and a little more like pinky purple, which I think helps probably it feel a little more me than if I were to try to do like something with the straight quinacridone violet. That probably wouldn't, go my way.
Yeah,
So
I
like
like the
that.
pink tone to it.
Yeah.
So we have another question, and yes, Tracy, I do love my lagoon. That's my favorite.
We
Okay,
all
so
have our colors.
oh, I do. Right. So we have a question for newbie watercolors. Is is it better to use cold or hot pressed watercolor paper? And which do you prefer? I think I asked Carissa this before, and she said whatever she has on hand. Um, I To be honest, whatever watercolor paper, hot pressed versus hot cold pressed, I think it's just your preference. You don't necessarily, just because you're a beginner, need to go for cold press or go for hot press. Just go for what you want to. And if you keep using the same paper, you'll just get used to it. So don't put yourself in a box. Get out the box. Try all the papers.
Yeah, for sure. And, maybe you don't want like a whole pad and you want to try it out. Maybe find a friend and you guys like split a pad or something like that to like, then you can try a little bit of each and you can decide, where do I want to go with this? Do I like this one better than that one? So there are ways for getting around some of this. So don't be afraid to try new things. If you're comfortable though, I mean, I would say once you find what you're comfortable with, then there's no reason that you have to do something different just because somebody else said they were using this or they were using that. Just you do you. I'm a big you do you girl. Like I say that a lot.
I also agree with what Carrie's just written down, and it says whatever's on sale works for me. And I am a frugal crafter, and I will use what I have, even if it's right at the bottom of my drawer. I will grab it. So whatever's on sale, and it will work. It will be fine.
It will. Now here is what I would not do. I would not try to watercolor on standard cardstock. You're not going to be happy with it. So paper does matter. I say this a lot. Paper matters with like ink blending. It matters with watercolor. It matters, but it matters more in that you're using the right paper for the job, right? So if it's designated as a watercolor paper, you're good to go. But I would not try to do this on like your standard white cardstock and expect to get good results. You're not going to get it. So that would be, it's not going to move on that paper. It's going to do its own thing. Now, here's what I'm going to do to kind of intensify. You've seen me kind of build up the color. I'm going to grab some of this quinacridone magenta. Do you say it quinacridone also, or
yes,
is it like
quinacridone?
Okay. Because we said phthalo different, so I just thought, well, maybe she says it different. So I'm bringing in some of that kind of more straight and bringing it towards the base of the petal to kind of bring in another color and just kind of intensify that, and watch it just kind of comes to life even more. You get like this under shading of like this bright pop that kind of, so I've done it.
It just looks like it's glowing. It's so pretty. So Cheryl has a question. She says it's a new palette made out of porcelain. It is in fact ceramic. So, and it's also really not as heavy as you think it's going to be. So when we first got this, we thought, oh, that's going to be quite, it's not. It is quite light. So if you are a painter that likes to hold your palette, I still think you'd be quite comfortable with this.
Yeah, I would say it's probably like a standard plate. If I had to guess, I don't know. I don't know what a plate weighs, but I've held one in my hand when it's time to eat dinner. So
yep. When you stood in the kitchen and everyone else is at the table and you're just like, no, I'm just getting it in. Just getting it in.
Yeah. Okay. So what I want to show you next is that detail and contrast matter. So we've added contrast with like our details of the swiping and this, but I'm going to show you a magic thing here. And that is just like a fine tip black pen. Now, do you see where I've kind of lost a little definition between these two leaves here? All I have to do is kind of come in with this really fine tip black pen, give it a little contrast, and then all of a sudden my leaves start to appear again.
That's cool. I would never have thought to do that. So at this point, I would have grabbed some colored pencil.
Okay, colored pencil would work too. So if you're like, okay, I've got my blob going here. All I have to do, and then I like to take it at the base of the flowers too, kind of where my color is most intense, and kind of add just a couple little flicks in there too.
Oh, it looks so cool. It looks like something out of a storybook.
Yeah, it just like kind of, I'm not tracing the entire petal. I'm just adding bits of it in there to kind of bring it to life. And I'm not sure, do you see the difference between here and these? So I've done it here. It's a subtle difference, but it kind of makes everything pop. And then I like this, like a little thin black pin to kind of come into the like speckles or I'm not a flower girl, so I don't know what these parts are called, but the center where it's like little dots, and I kind of just dot it in there. And
I
that
think
brings,
it's stamen, but I know JC would have some more words for them because he
yes,
knows all the different bits.
let me just tell you, he knows all the parts of the flowers and like what kind of flowers they are. I couldn't tell you what kind of flowers these are. They're pretty. That's what I can tell you. And so I'm just going to take the black pen and just kind of add just little details. It's not like super fussy. It's just kind of more like, let's get it brought in there.
Yeah, I love
Now,
adding doodles as well because it really makes it your own.
look at the difference between this flower around the center of it and this flower. Do you see the detail that we brought in by just this little black pin? Someone said, Tammy said, "You so pretty, you make it look so easy." It's. I want to remind you, it's like a series of steps, right? So as long as you're breaking it down into steps, every step is pretty easy, but you just got to follow the process to make it work. So, okay. So I'm not going to I want to show you how I finish this card. So I'm not going to go through all of I'm not going to finish this completely, but I will show you what I did because I didn't use this part here, and that's actually really easy. So let's zoom out. Hopefully we won't come too far out and you won't see, I don't know, my lap or something like that. There, that looks about right. So I'm going to set my watercolors aside. And I'm going to grab the coordinating die set for the Garden Whispers. And I'm going to die cut this. Now, you're like, Carissa, you didn't use that petal. Trust me, we're going to make it work. Because we've got, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on everybody here.
I don't think anyone's going to complain if you go over, Carissa. We're all quite happy watching you create.
Carrie said makes a huge difference. It's like the tiny little things. And someone said patience is key. Noelle said that. And yes, it is a process. This is not a card you're going to make in 10 minutes. This is like something you make for your mom and she's super proud of you when you're done, you know?
Yeah. See, we have Mother's Day next month.
Yeah.
I know that in the US, your Mother's Day is in May. So this is something that we would make. I would make
for
mine.
Sure. You know what? In fact, I was making this the other day. My mom's been very sick, and I FaceTimed her, and I said, "Mom, I was just painting this flower, and it was making me think of you because my grandma was a big fan of purple. My mom's a big fan of purple, and I was just like, it made me think of you. So I like held it up in the FaceTime cam, and I was like, look, isn't it so pretty? You know, I felt like a little third grader with her art project, kind of making the, like, Mom, aren't you so proud of me? But, she was. And this is definitely something like I would give to my mom. So I've die cut this out. And now I'm just going to go around this little area here. And because that ink is light enough, it's not really going to matter that much. And I'm just going to cut around these couple little petals here to finish off this image. And that way I can use it in a totally different way. It's like a totally different orientation, right?
It
And
looks so pretty, and it's properly stretching the image that you had.
yeah. So then, and really I was like, I don't have time to paint all of this. So we're going to do it this way. So I have a few things here. I have some, this is evening gray cardstock here. It's cut to, I don't know, it's probably 3 1/4 by 4 1/4. Okay. So all I did was stamp that with the Rustic linen background stamp. So let me show you. So easy to do. This will take like 2 seconds. We're going to use the same permanent mist gray because it's on our surface, and we might as well just, go for it, right? And then the other day when I was creating, what I did was I made that One Go solid sentiment strips in Morning Frost, and I have a bunch of those. So I just grabbed another one. So it gets you, I don't know, there's probably 12 sentiments on there, I would guess, offhand. Somebody can correct me.
That's a lot.
Yeah, all in one. And so it's like one pass of the Better Press. You could use it with your foil as well. So we have just a little bit of texture on there. This Rustic linen's a great little, just for texture kind of thing. And then all we have to do is kind of layer all this up with some foam adhesive, and our card comes together so easily.
That looks so pretty. I love that sentiment set as well. And I love that you've mixed and matched like a die sentiment with a stamp sentiment too.
Yeah. And I did not show you something so important though. So we're going to go back to this for just a second because we didn't show the shimmer relief. I need to show you this.
If you don't have the shimmer relief paste, you could also probably use
metallic watercolors.
Yeah, the metallic watercolor, because this one's out of stock at the minute.
I know.
If you get your hands on it, you are very lucky.
Yeah, it's so sad. But I did want to show you that you can do this if you want to, because there's a lot of product in this thing too. So much product. So I'm just going to take a little tiny bit. You don't need a ton. I'm going to put it on my palette. I'm going to actually throw my palette knife in the water just so that it doesn't dry on there while I'm live. And then I will take palette knife in the water. We're fine. It's all fine. I'm going to take a little bit of this special color that I mixed up, and I'm going to mix it in with a little bit of that pearl, or you could use the metallic watercolor. And then I'm going to paint this onto the highlight portions of my petal. So the parts that I've left the lightest. So just kind of through here. And that is what gave me that kind of sheen on the petals. And you can kind of play with this and see how thick you want it, how pigmented you want it. But it kind of just gives a little bit of shine. See if you can see this. I don't know that you can see it, but it is beautiful. I think you can see it more on the dried project, which I'll show you again. But I'm just painting it on with my paintbrush with just a little bit of tint to it. I don't want too much tint because I don't want it to like take over my highlighted portions, right? If it gets too tinted, then I lose that highlight. So I'm maintaining my highlight and just adding it in here.
Yeah, so Tracy's saying mix it with your paintbrush. Doesn't it hurt it? No, it doesn't. So the paste is like water-based and it washes away really quite easily from your paintbrush. You just need to make sure that you do it while it's wet. Do not leave that to dry.
Right. So I'm going to pop it into my water when I'm done here. And I actually did this with this brush the other day on Monday. So it can be done. But like Lydia's saying, you don't want to leave it to dry in there. So I'm just kind of moving that around. It's not like perfect. It's just kind of smearing some of that color. And I think you can see this now. Do you see how it's like
so pretty?
That sheen on there? Oh, love that. If you know me, I'm a shimmer girl. I'm a shine girl. I love all things sparkly. And so that's where this diamond glitter cardstock comes in too with my sentiment. And I think this purple and this gray together, just so gorgeous. So I think you all know how to kind of plop that all down, but this is what we end up with. Isn't that beautiful?
I think it's so cool. I love the details with the fine liners and also the paste. But like we said, we could use the metallic watercolor or even the iridescent ink spray. You could use that as well.
For sure. And that spray's cool if you wanted to put it over the entire thing. You could just spritz and you'd be done. But
so Jill is asking, what brushes would you buy to go with the 36 palette? It depends on whether you want like do details or not. But we do have a number of different kits in the store of the paintbrushes, and anyone would be good. It just depends on your preference on how big you want your brushes to be.
If you're doing, let me pipe in on that one, because if you're doing like a huge background, I would pick up like a flat brush, and I know I saw those in the Altenew shop the other day. Something with a flat brush if you're doing like huge backgrounds. And then for the details like this, those fine watercolor brushes were great because I could come in there and add my little flicks and that sort of thing. And you can see how all these like little layers layer up together. They're all simple steps, but they make a really beautiful no line watercolor look. So much fun. And you can see these look a little different, right? But this one's not totally done either, but just both really beautiful looks.
They look very vintage, very pretty.
Yeah, they do. And I love that kind of earthy yellow that we created with that deep yellow and that quinacridone violet together. Kind of makes that earthy yellow, makes a great brown too. So, and I, like Lydia said, I only have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I only have 10 tubes on my palette right now. And I used 1, 2, 3, 4. And I did all that variation.
It's so good how much you can kind of mix around with these and really have a good play. Like we said, if you did want to just start out with the, the primary colors, so a red, a yellow, and a blue, that's a good way to start. But I do think that the pink and the purple are really cool to have as well.
Yeah, and if you're like me, and this is actually a primary palette too, but it's a little different. You could go with the magenta, the deep yellow, and the dark cyan and kind of create a lot too. Or you could go with the traditional red and like the Prussian blue, and you can make a lot of colors with this too. These are going to give you a slightly different tone for your
I think it's more playful, that one.
Yeah, it totally is.
I also love the opera lemon, even though it's like neon. I just
look at this. It's like a doozy. It will slap you in the face. But keep in mind, you have a little bit of that purple, or even the blue is going to make it green, right?
Yeah, but when you mix that with other colors, it's so pretty.
Yeah.
That's why we added it in, because like the greens that you can get with that yellow were just beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. So.
Okay. Yeah, that opera yellow.
Look at that. Isn't that fun? It's almost like a citron with that opera yellow. I grabbed a little bit of this neighboring, and it has a little bit of that violet in it, that neighboring green and that violet. And it's like the citron color. It's so pretty.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Carissa. Do you want to move yourself up so we could say, I'm going to say good evening, but you'll be just saying good afternoon to everyone.
Yeah, I feel like I've lived a whole day. It's only 1:30 here in California. So
yeah, but you get up really early.
I do get up really early. We were talking about this ahead of time. So there she is. There she
I
is.
forgot to put myself back on. I was like, oh, there I am. There's me.
I was like, maybe I'm closing it out on my own. Maybe she decided to put a face mask on and she's going to bed.
Yep, maybe. Maybe I took the makeup off and I'm just gone. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Carissa. That card was absolutely stunning. And I know that people are really loving all the tips and tricks that you gave them. Thank you to the amazing Han for popping in all of the links. You are a star and we love it when you are there. Again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We really do hope that you have a very crafty day and that you have a nice weekend planned too. That's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
we'll see you very, very soon. And again, we don't forget to help out. We hope that we helped craft your life. Thank you. Goodbye.